The recording is started here. Eddie, wonderful to
Okay.
meet you from across the pond. How's your day going today?
My day went very well today. I always like to start the day, Kelly, with about 2 hours of piano practice. You can see this beautiful instrument behind me, and I was playing. I always like to warm up, of course,
Yes,
but I was playing quite a lot of Chopin and Schubert today, and I'm preparing for a little recital I'm giving next week for the
very nice.
Golden Jubilee of the Scientific and Medical Network.
Well, wonderful. You're giving a recital. And yeah, I'm so blessed because your publicist reached out to me. She follows me on TikTok and she's like, yeah, let's get Eddie on your podcast. And I'm like, I'm telling you, Eddie, I was as nervous as I've ever been for a podcast. This is my 40th episode. But then once, we got on and we did an
Mm.
audio and mic check, I'm like, why were you even nervous? This dude is just amazing. He's so kind and caring, yet you've got a little thing called a PhD behind your name. So I'm like, wow. And you got books upon books. And I don't do a lot of homework, do a lot of research on my guests. I just like to see how it unfolds. And literally,
That's fair enough,
that's
Kelly.
fun for me.
And let me just quickly tell you two things. If
Good.
one isn't nervous for an occasion, one shouldn't be doing it. There is nerves and nerves. Look, I've been playing the piano all my life.
Okay.
Whenever I'm in front of an audience, I'm nervous, not well, only because it's that adrenaline rush and you want to give your best. And,
Correct.
that's what the nerves is about. If you're not prepared, that's another case, of course. But if you're prepared to play the piano or sing or whatever, you must be nervous to a certain extent to have that energy. And the other thing, look, about a PhD, I've known enough academics in my life. Some of them are about as empty headed, despite all their millions of titles, and some of them are humble and understand that you can be intelligent without necessarily being an academic, and there's a big difference.
What a perfect. Yeah, that's a great response. And I agree with you 110%. But right now, I'm not nervous because you're very easy to talk to. And
Thank you.
I just like this guy is amazing to me. And so you were an engineer for the longest time. Why engineering? Why did you start out as an engineer? What thrilled you about
Well,
that?
because I like to find out how things work,
Oh,
and
man.
and engineering is the perfect coming together of the theoretical and the practical. A lot of people in academia and in the pure sciences, let's say, they can be really up in their heads. And if the research grant lasts forever, they'll be doing the same thing. But an engineer has to deliver on results. So you have to stick to a budget, you have to produce something practical. So the practicality of engineering is what appealed to me. But on another level, it was an inner realization that the laws of science expressed through technology and engineering, the laws of science on the physical level are really a projection of laws on a higher level.
Whoa.
There is absolutely no conflict in my mind between physical science, engineering, and consciousness studies and music, because all of them are manifestations of laws on different levels of being.
I just had to write that down because that was so brilliant because I have a computer science degree and
Mm.
I was a programmer for 25 years and that's what fascinated me was how things work too. My favorite story about me as a child was the old transistor radios,
Mm,
and where they had the little 5 millimeter earphone jack, and you just put a little thing in your ear. It's like a long time
mm,
ago. And
mm.
I opened that little thing up, and it was baby red. Opened it up because I just wanted to see how it worked. And I've always been fascinated how things work. And like you, I started at the physical level, and now I'm looking at it at a, I guess, if the right term is metaphysical world.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair enough, Kelly. Yeah.
And I love that. That's why I love having guests on that fascinate me, because you have explored the metaphysical world
Mm,
in terms of
definitely.
from the engineering world. Like, there was a Nobel Peace Prize winner that basically surmised that your thoughts can reach the end of the universe and back. Like,
Mm,
just you can send in your thought to the edge of the universe and back. And I can't remember what theory that was, but they won a Nobel Peace Prize for that. And I thought, wow, that's the stuff I like to explore.
mm,
And you got 4 volumes of exploration of that,
mm.
and which
And
my
indeed, your site is Every Thought Matters,
right,
which is highly appropriate.
right,
And the central point there is everything starts with thought.
right.
So whether you're designing the Channel Tunnel, which I was heavily involved with a long time ago,
Oh
the
yeah.
Channel Tunnel didn't make itself. It started off as a thought, and then
Mm,
that thought concretizes, so to speak. So, speaking metaphysically, you have just thought, then you got to plan the thought, you got to organize it, and then you got to have working tools and materials to put that thought into flesh, or concrete in this case. So, in an organization, you have the vision, the chief executive, if you like, you have middle management, project management, and you
right.
have the workers. Now, middle management, project management, they have to interface at the higher level with the chief executive, and at the lower level with the workers. High, low, I don't mean that in a
No,
pejorative
I know
sense.
what you mean.
Yeah, yeah. So the middle management are the interface, the lens through which the vision, the thought of the chief executive manifests at the concrete level. Similarly, in the human body, the human being, we have the principle of the soul. The soul is the interface that touches at the highest level spirit and at the lowest body. Highest and lowest, I again emphasize, are entirely relative. So the without the soul principle, you can have the most wonderful spirit, but your body isn't informed.
Yes.
So this is how I see engineering and esoteric science, all part of one universal wisdom. You see the same principle at work.
Like,
You see the
I've
same universal principles. Sorry, you got.
no, it's okay, dude. I love it because you started off with the fact that you actually worked on the tunnel on the English Channel. And for my American listeners, there was a tunnel between the UK and France, correct?
Yes.
They probably didn't know that. When you said the channel, I knew what you were talking about, but
But
I love
the French would say between
that.
France and UK.
Right. Oh yeah. But
I'm
going back
being
to that, and
facetious.
that's kind of funny because that's really cool. That's a really expansion of what you just said, because the French may have thought that it was their original thought, and the UK may have thought it was their
Yeah.
original thought. How does that work between those two? Like, my original thought is, I personally, I believe that I manifested you into my life because it was a thought,
Mm,
and that thought became concrete, and I'm sitting and looking at another human.
mm.
But France had that version and UK had that version. From
Well,
a physics perspective, how does that work from thoughts and energy and vibrational reality between two beings?
well, from a physics perspective, one can think of Rupert Sheldrake's wonderful theory of the morphogenetic field, that when something manifests into the world mind, then those people who are tuned into that stream will pick up the relevant aspects of that thought. One sees throughout science periods when the same thought almost simultaneously manifests in prepared minds. The most obvious example is Newton and Leibniz. And even though they so unfortunately squabbled over it, they both independently invented the calculus. And that's just one example. In music, you have the genre of the nocturne, which Chopin and John Field almost independently brought down, let's say. So when something is due to manifest on this earthly plane, it's like a cloud that drops its water droplets on people whose minds are tuned in that direction. Well, the Channel Tunnel was being talked about for a long time. It was an idea, I think, in the 18th century, and that thought gets trickled down into various minds. But
And then,
it's very meaningless to say my thought, your thought. It is our thought.
ooh, wow, you are so amazing. I love that because I'm at a point right now, like I'm exploring the metaphysical world and exploring consciousness, and part of me believes that I'm a soul living in a human, which I do believe that. But
Mm.
if it's our thought, so it's our thoughts that we do. Okay, so let's ask this. I'm gonna. What do you believe? Because everybody's different. Because one
Mm.
thing I read, I'm rereading this really great book called Illusions. Uh, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah by Richard Bach, and which
Mhm.
is one of my favorite books. I've read it 5 times, and he talks about that there are 7 billion different versions of the universe right now. Your
Mm.
version of what's out there is different than my version, but those droplets come and they become our thoughts. I'm trying to connect those 2, and as somebody who has and I got to read the caption on your photo, which I love, because I'm going to read that really fast. Unfolding consciousness, exploring the living universe and intelligent powers in nature and humans. And
Mm.
that, so how does that become our thought? Where I don't have possession of it, the thought that I have, say, to create the Golden Gate Bridge was not just one person. It was a thought that was given to many, and one person acted on it. Is that how you're thinking?
Yes, given to one and many. Well, it's the
Huh?
same with music. Most certainly, the great works of Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, and the
Right, right,
others
right.
was certainly, you can't say it's it's our thought, but they would not claim, I think, in their heart of hearts, that they invented the music. I think they would say that by virtue of their sensitivity, they were able to raise an antenna to the field of universal mind and
Hmm.
pull down that which resonated with their own unique nature. So, to the extent that I am meditating on great poetry, say, as an example, then the poetry that I write is, so to speak, my poetry, but it's only my, in inverted commas, because I have raised my consciousness to a level where I'm in tune, in resonance with the great poetry and literature of the world. So one level informs another level. So it's only mine in the sense that I have given it flesh. I've enfleshed it, so to speak. I've materialized it.
This is why I like you. I'm like, that's why I'm so blessed to be here with you, because you're very well read, very well spoken, and you've done a lot of academia work, but yet you're explaining something to me in very real terms, which I love. I love the fact that and this is a brand new, literally brand new thought for me to think that what I want to manifest is our thoughts. And it's just me raising my antenna to the right vibration, even though that same antenna has been raised to maybe 100,000 other people. I'm the one
Oh yeah.
receiving it, but
Mm.
and I like it because in inverted quotes, it's mine, but it really isn't mine. That's a really wonderful way to look at it because that helps me understand my view of humanity, but my view of consciousness because I'll throw this at you. I believe that we have neurons that fire in our heart, right? There's the same kind of neurons that fire in your brain. There's like our heart is 25% neurons or something to that effect. I can't remember where it's at. So nobody quote me on that, please. Thank you. But there's neurons in our heart, which is where love comes from. But we're all collectively connected in that energy that fires, which to me is divine energy. So that does kind of connect with the fact that we are all collective consciousness. To me, is that kind of how you explain this unconsciousness piece where it's not my thought, it's our thought?
Well, you're really, Kelly, raising the issue of infinite diversity in unity and how unity expresses through infinite diversity.
Ooh,
So the many are aspects of the one that expresses through the many. But you touched on a vital point, really vital, when you mentioned the heart. The Heart Math Institute is a wonderful one in the US. Roland McCratty, I think, is the director. And they have done clinical studies showing that and I've mentioned the figures in volume 2 of Unfolding Consciousness, that
mm-hmm.
the electrical field, the magnetic field, and the electromagnetic field of the heart is several orders of magnitude greater than that in the brain. So the heart is a sadly neglected organ, spiritual organ, of our general public collective consciousness. The whole of science is neurotically obsessed with the brain, as though we're just brains walking on legs and nothing else in between. Forget the heart. The heart is, to use, one has to use analogies. The heart is like the invisible signals from the radio station, which the brain makes manifest. So looking at me on the screen now, you're not in my screen, but the invisible signals via my Wi-Fi and all of that have been made manifest, have been given visibility through the electronics in the computer. So the brain is the door that points to the external world. It provides the objective space-time experience. But in that mansion, that beautiful mansion that we call the human body, there are internal doors, there are internal passageways through which there are wonderful subjective currents and influences, and the heart plays a role in that to a great extent. And it is my persuasion that a lot of heart problems, of course, many of them are caused by physical factors, of course, but the misuse of the heart can also cause serious heart problems on the physical heart. For example, misuse of the heart, unrequited love, or any other loneliness or unfulfilled aspirations, all of that can repercuss on the physical organ. So the heart is indeed the center of consciousness. The brain is the center of intellectual consciousness. And let's not forget the generative system is the center of reproductive or physical consciousness. And all three have to work together. But one sees in the typical intellectual, one center dominates. In the typical, well, the more physical types, the lower center dominates, fair enough. And in the more compassionate types, the heart dominates. But in the really evolved person, all three work as one.
Wow.
But the heart is so important, and its role needs to be emphasized. There have been some clinical studies showing heart transplants where the patient, the recipient, has taken on the qualities of the donor heart. But science is obsessed with the brain.
Yes.
To its detriment.
Well, the last word, I don't think that it's detrimental, but because
detriment only in the sense that when you
the
take
heart's
anything
being
to extremes, you neglect the most important,
Sure.
only in that
Absolutely.
sense. Sorry, I'm interrupting. Sorry.
It's all right, Eddie. This is not an interview. I love conversation. I love listening to you. You're so, I don't know, you're brilliant, but yet you explain it to ways that I, can understand. And I love that. And I love that for my audience as well. And I love the fact that you talked about those three places, which was the heart, your reproductive systems, and what was the other one?
The brain center, the
brain.
intellectual.
So all three have to work together for.
Yeah.
Does that coincide with the 7 chakras?
No, I wouldn't say coincide, but they're definitely related.
They're related. Okay.
Most
Talk about
certainly.
that.
I mean, you can say that the generative, the Muladhara, the heart chakra, the Anahat, and the crown
Brain.
chakra are the three main ones, and the
Right.
others are like, you looking at my piano, like overtones of the three principles. So all the others are the overtones of the three main. So in that sense, it does relate to the chakras, yes.
Wonderful.
And when the lower chakra is active, we procreate children of the flesh.
Sure.
When the higher chakra is active, we not procreate, we create children of the mind. Great books, literature, music.
I never thought of it that way.
So you can see that polarity between the upper pole and the lower pole.
Yep, I
Children
agree.
of the mind, children of the flesh.
Wow.
Both are important.
Yeah, but I think what connects them, the both of them, is the heart, right?
It has to be.
Wow,
the middle
that's
principle.
amazing.
Yeah.
My mind is just swimming with thoughts, and which is wonderful. So I'm going to ask you this really beautiful question, which is something I've been pondering. I don't think there's an answer to it, but do we receive thoughts or do we think thoughts?
We call them into being.
Ooh, come on. You got to give me some more than that. Expand on that, because that's beautiful,
Right.
Eddie. I love that.
Yeah. We don't generate thoughts. Now, this is the huge debate in science. Does the brain generate thought? And oh gosh, very briefly, the Templeton Foundation, they've just awarded a 25 million prize at the last conference in Illinois, Chicago, on 2 clever experiments to show how the brain generates consciousness. And that subject has not been resolved at all, because it's asking the wrong question. To say, how does the brain generate consciousness, assumes that it does in the first place. Brain does not generate consciousness. The brain uses and works, consciousness uses and works through the brain. Now, I can do no better than remind readers of that great American William James, the father of psychology, in his lectures on human immortality, when William James pointed out that even in his time, it was a common error of psychology to say that the brain generates consciousness. Now, what do we mean by productive function? He says there are three kinds of productive function. There's the direct productive function. Steam is generated by a kettle. You turn the heat on, the steam is generated by a kettle. But
Sure.
there is another function which is not productive, it's permissive. He says, William James, the crossbow doesn't produce the arrow, it releases the arrow. And
True.
then the most important is transmissive. Now, like a great psychologist, he quotes the great poet Shelley, William
Mm-hmm.
James, that life, like a dome of many-colored glass, stains the white radiance of eternity. Life, like a dome of many-colored glass, stains the white radiance of eternity. So look at it like this. You have white light and a prism. The prism does not produce the colors. It splits the colors. Similarly, what our brains, so to speak, do, they act like a prism, like the refractive index. The refractive index is the extent to which the light is bent. That's why a stick looks bent in water. So our being, our personality, is like a refractive prism that stains the white radiance of eternity. And the more we can clarify our minds through meditation, through prayer, through purity of life, the less obstruction will we present to that light. So we don't generate thoughts. We call them into being. And consciousness uses the brain, but is not generated by the brain.
This is interesting because when you talk about the refractive energy, like when you first started going down that little rabbit hole, which I loved every second of it, and wrote down so many notes, but the first
Yeah.
thing that came to my mind was that our brains are literally antennas for thought, which I love. I freaking love that because that just, for me as a human, that releases my need for control. It just be a receiver, let go, receive. And I love that. But then you talked about the brain.
Be an active receiver. Yeah.
Right, be an active
Yeah.
receiver
Yeah,
because
because that antenna can pick up a lot of white noise and junk.
absolutely. And
Mm.
it's just like there's a lot of talk, and one of my favorite things to talk about is active listening because when you talk, and that's what I try to do as best as I can on the podcast is be an active listener. Instead of trying to interrupt you with a thought, I've tried to listen completely and then come to there. And I think the brain is a lot like that, is being an active listener and discarding the ones that are white noise. But then, okay, I'm gonna go down a rabbit hole for you, and then I'm gonna just sit back and smile, and because I know you're gonna help me understand something, because I just love how your brain works. Because you are an active you're an active receiver. It's so easy to see. But when you stand on the ground on Mother Earth, you are basically grounded to the center of the earth. The center of the earth, by virtue of rotating around the sun, is grounded to the center of the sun, correct?
Hmm.
Physically, just work with me here. And then the center of the sun is actively revolving around the galaxy, which is the center of the galaxy. So you're now connected to the center of the galaxy, which is going around the universe. So it's connected to the center of the universe. So by virtue of connecting to Mother Earth through your feet, not with shoes on, and all of that.
Yeah.
You're literally connected to the universe, which makes me
Yes, you
think
are.
about the sun being part of that dynamic thing, because I'll add one more layer and then I'm going to let you go. And I'm
Oh, no.
going to be so excited. But Shelley, what was the name of the poet? Shelley, that said
Shelley.
that our,
Yeah.
right.
Percy Best Shelley. Yes.
Percy Best Shelley said that the brain is like a multicolored layer of hiding
Uh,
out the white light.
well, we are like a dome of stained glass,
Okay.
colored glass. Yeah. Not hiding,
Well,
staining, coloring.
staining and coloring it, right? But
Yeah.
this, from a pure physics perspective, the sunlight that comes to us is colorless, yet the reflective light of the ozone layer brings the color to us for those of us who are not colorblind. So it's kind of similar to that effect. So,
And here you have a beautiful example, Kelly, of as above, so below. The wonderful Hermetic saying, what happens in the heavens is mirrored on earth, which is why and how the greatest scientists, when they wanted to understand things in the higher realms, always looked to what happened on earth. The great Newton
yep.
intuited the law of gravity when he saw the fall of the apple and said, well, if objects fall like this on Earth, then how about the orbit of the moon in its movement? The sun is absolutely vital. The sun and the stars, let's include stars as well. Stars are suns, of course.
Hmm.
Let me tell you the difference between the hard science approach and the enlightened approach, if I can put it that way.
Perfect.
Steven Weinberg, very famous Nobel scientist, you've all heard of him. In his book, Dreams of a Final Theory, he says, gone are the days when we can celebrate with David the glory of the heavens, because we now know that the stars, meaning the sun, of course, the stars, the sun as well, are nothing but, note the word, nothing but, glowing spheres of gas where the inward collapse of particles due to gravitation, that is supported by the heat upthrust, the heat generated by thermonuclear processes in the core of the star. So you've got those two processes in balance. You've got inward collapse supported by upward heat. Now, the whole point is, Kelly, that is true, but that's not all. When Galileo invited Monteverdi to look through his telescope, Monteverdi obviously saw a glowing sphere, but he saw more. He saw divinity in that, and he wrote his beautiful Vespers. Another similar example, the great Haydn, who taught Beethoven, revered by Mozart, when Haydn was asked to look through the telescope of Sir William Herschel, you know, Sir William Herschel, who discovered Uranus, he was also a very eminent composer. He was a composer and wrote wonderful music. So when Haydn looked through Herschel's telescope, he was inspired to write his beautiful oratorio, The Creation. Now, with every apology to Steven Weinberg, his books may not be on our bookshelves for the next 50 years. Monteverdi's Vespers and Haydn's Creation have been with us for centuries and will be with us for centuries, because they saw the divinity that expressed through matter. Whereas Weinberg, he actually says in his book that the stars, and I quote here, the stars show no more about divinity than the stones on the ground around you. Well,
Hmm.
how about that for humility?
Hmm.
The
That's
stars, the
fascinating.
sun, the very sun that gives us life shows no more about divinity than the stones on around you. Well, thank you very much. You have your thoughts and I have mine.
Nice. That's fascinating. I love that you know these works, and that's like a Cliff Notes version of all of this, which is really, really cool to me. And yeah, I see the divinity in space. It's like my favorite place on Earth is a beach at night because there's
Mm,
two things that I love about it. One, if it's a clear night, there's all these stars that took hundreds of thousands of years to just shine that in that moment in time so I could see them. And two, because of the moon, the waves never stop. The
mm,
waves don't care. I drive by the ocean every day on my way to work, and I think
mm.
there are thousands of species that don't even know I exist. They don't
Yes.
even know that there's humans above that on
Mm,
the other side. That's just and I love the humble nature of that because that also, for me being that humble, it's also very divine and it's also very spiritual because it
mm,
actually raises my spiritual vibration. It doesn't
mm.
lower it. You want to
No, of
think,
course
oh, I'm
not.
humble. It's a lower vibration. No, that's a very high
No, humble
vibrational
doesn't
thing.
mean servile. It
Nope.
doesn't mean servile, far from it.
Nope.
Um, to be humble is one of the finest attributes, and it can go with every confidence and conviction. But arrogance, I'm afraid, is the prime disease of a lot of our intellectual community.
Sure. But uh, there's I love what you have said. And one of the other things I love is like, there's that very viral video on YouTube that's about basically how water can be affected by emotion. Have you
Oh,
seen that
yes.
one?
No, I haven't seen that one.
But you
But
know it exists, right?
yeah, there have been similar studies. And a long time ago, the French scientist Jacques Benveniste, he wrote a paper which purported to show, which it did, the homeopathic principle in broad terms, and he was absolutely slaughtered by the establishment. So water, it does. What's the word you use, Kelly? Convey or be a container for, or a reservoir for emotion.
I don't know if
We
it's a
have
reservoir. It is affected by emotion. It
affected by
changes
enough.
its
Yeah, sure.
the molecules change based on your emotion. So
Yes,
if
it
I can
changes.
look at bottle of water, it's going to change motion
It
because
does.
right
Yeah,
now,
yeah, right. Its
right,
vibratory characteristic changes, and we've
right,
all heard of the holy water, the holy springs, and
right.
this isn't just superstitious. You
Nope.
know, it's this is the wisdom of the ages. There is water that has healing qualities, and I think studies have shown that by praying over water, you affect its structure.
Yep.
Most certainly.
I love that because but there's just like a little trickle in my brain. Again, I'm learning to, even here, sitting here talking to you, I'm learning to be an antenna rather than a thinker, which is great because the antenna is like, there's so much math involved in the works of Beethoven and Chopin and Bach. And, I people have written books about just the math alone that's inside
Yes.
those arrangements. And I'm not
Yeah.
talking Beethoven's Fifth. I'm like some of the Chopin's
Bach.
and Bach specifically.
Mm.
I was just fascinated by that. Have you ever looked into that, or is it something that I just had to ask you because you're obviously a pianist and you're going to do a
Yeah,
recital?
well, most certainly it is deeply mathematical in the sense that mathematics is the really expressing a science of proportion and harmony.
Mm-hmm.
So, you find the golden mean, for example, at very definite points in Mozart sonatas, in Beethoven's symphonies, and in Chopin's work. So the golden mean is very much an aspect of mathematical proportion. And the great fugues of Bach can be, in a sense, encoded in a mathematical form that it's almost like starting from a bud, it blossoms into the various flowers.
Kind of like the caterpillar. Caterpillar thinks the world's ending, and the butterfly knows that it's not.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah, it's a nice one.
I've always loved that. You know, I've been fascinated by that, and I still in that little world of. I know that, to quote Richard Bach, if you're alive, what is it? How did he say it in his book? And Illusions is such a great book, and if you've never read
Mm.
that book, you should. It just
Mhm.
it's playful, it's funny, but it's very spiritual because basically it follows a Messiah in the 70s. They're doing in the US, they would do these little plane tours for people. They would go to small towns and ride in planes, and for
Mm.
$10 you could ride in a plane, you know.
Mhm.
And this Messiah was one of those guys. And he says, you know, here's a test to figure out whether your purpose in life is fulfilled. If you're alive, it isn't. And I've always loved that because I had a humans, it's like 1 in 4 trillion chance of being a human. I had 1 in 4 chance of being a human.
Mm.
1 in 4 trillion. So that's astronomical. But I try to marry that with the fact that I'm in this meat suit, as I call it, but
Mm.
yet learning how to be the antenna, like you said, trying to, like you, I'm very curious and that's why I got you on here because I'm trying to curious how to manufacture both of the kind of make those two peacefully coexist. That I'm a man, you know, that I have reproductive rights, I have a brain, and I have a heart, but I'm also this antenna for
Mm.
these thoughts. Because now I'm going back to, forgive me, but the Golden Gate Bridge was probably a thought for 100,000 people, or the English Tunnel,
Mm.
the Channel Tunnel was a thought probably by a lot of people. Like you said, in the 1700s, the 18th century, they were thinking about it, but they finally got it done. Just like, what was the lady's name that finally swam the English Channel and nobody could? I can't. A
Oh, the
lot of
first
people.
one,
Yeah, what was her name?
I think, wasn't it Trudy something?
Something like that. Yeah,
Could be wrong. Something like that. Yeah,
but the 100 people had it, so, and she executed it, which kind
yeah.
of coincides where that thought she was there. A lot of people were the antenna, but she had the right vibrational properties within her brain in order for her to do that.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
think that's really
mm,
kind of goes back to what you talked about right at the
yeah.
beginning of the podcast. And I think that's just fascinating to me.
Can I pick up on something very significant you said? I hadn't heard of that quote, but the caterpillar thinks the world is at the end. The butterfly knows it's only starting, or it hasn't. But the what you said is that mainstream science looks fatally only to the change in form. So evolution in mainstream science is only concerned with the change of form. But in order for form to change, there has to be an active principle behind it. So
Mm-hmm.
that active principle, it's something that mainstream science has no idea or no interest in. Form cannot change unless something wants to make it change.
That
And
goes
what
back
makes it,
to keep
yeah,
going, please. You're
yeah,
doing great.
what makes it change is the pressure of consciousness or a specific aspect of consciousness. You, you take the famous case quoted of the giraffe. Now, how come that it has a light head on a long neck, because if the head were heavy, the neck muscles would have to be much stronger. How come it has a much stronger heart to pump up to the head? How come that it has valving in the throat, so when he puts his head down, everything doesn't go tumbling out? Now, if it's just a change of form, what is creating, what's the active principle behind that change of form? And science hates the word teleology, which is goal-directed evolution. Goal-directed evolution.
Well,
In Rumi, the great poet,
yes,
didn't he not say that I died as a stone and I was reborn a plant? I died as a plant, I was reborn an animal. I died as an animal, reborn a human. I died as a human, I reached my maker. Where was I any less by dying? So one of the real lovely sayings of the ancient wisdom is dying for the sake of life. Dying for the sake of life. So the outer form is always transient. The outer form, our physical bodies, are always going to die. Why die? For the sake of life. As Khalil Gibran, the great Lebanese mystic, how beautifully he puts it, a little while, a little rest, and a new woman will bear me forth. So the woman, the humanity, provides the material form for me, but I am immortal. My mortal vestures, of course, are mortal and will die. But science only looks to the mortal and the transient. And by science, of course, I only mean materialistic science, not
sure.
great science, of course. And there are many tremendous great scientists whose great thoughts have hardly cut much ice.
But science doesn't actually, take that step further to the metaphysical. Even our metaphysical, even our spirituality is constantly changing. And science doesn't look at that even. Because I
No,
love the
it doesn't like the word spirituality. It doesn't mean anything.
right, which is too bad because that's where the science should be for me. And as you talked about that Heart Institute over, I think it was in Illinois, you said, just,
No, the Illinois was the Templeton Foundation
oh, that's
conference,
right.
but the Heart Math, Roland McCratty.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can
No, that's great. No, I love being
Heart
corrected.
Heart Math Institute. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I've never thought of it that way because you're just, I'm, one thing I love about my podcast is that it helps me raise that antenna to receive rather than to think. And I love that. And it's always an endorphin rush, but I'm learning so much from you. And I knew I would because I knew you had these 4 volumes of the unconsciousness. And what led you to that as to literally write 4 different volumes on the unconsciousness, which I think is
No,
fascinating.
unconsciousness, not unconsciousness.
It's consciousness. You're right.
Yeah,
Well,
sorry. Yeah, yeah.
interesting.
Well, what led is a complex one. I certainly wasn't asked to. I certainly wasn't paid. It's the same sort of thing as why is one driven to write a book or compose a piece of music? It has to start from love, and I mean that.
I do.
The love of the subject. But my other motive was to insert clarity into a lot of scientific and esoteric thinking. So the first volume deals with science, fully acknowledging its triumphs, but also pointing out its deficiencies and explaining that the esoteric science, the perennial philosophy, provides that gap, provides the huge missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle that science cannot address. So given that overview, the first volume is an overview, the second volume is a microscopic looking into the human being, the human body at all levels. And the third volume is a telescopic vision relating the human body, the human being, to the cosmos. And volume 4 is references, glossary, and clarifications. So the 4 volumes are really part of one process.
Sure.
But my first 2 books, the second one, The Snake and the Rope, the subtitle was Mirages or Problems in Physical Science Resolved by Occult Science.
Wow. Just amazing. Then with your journey, being an engineer and just like what kind as a writer myself, what kind of process, like how long did it take? That's one first thing I wanted to know, how long it took to
The
write it.
4 volumes took 20 years, but I would say 75% of it was the last 7 years. And of that 75%, about 80% was during the pandemic.
Understood. You had a little extra free time, but still, it's a, my spirit, I channel spirit a lot because I'm an Akashic Tarot reader, which really, that honest to goodness coincides with, it's not my thought, it's an antenna to receive a thought that's being sent out. So, and I think the Akashic records, as they're explained to be, are the same kind of thought process, which in turn, go ahead. I think you're onto something.
It is very good to see that science, I don't know if you can see this.
I can, sort of.
Anyway, by Erwin Laszlo, one of the most celebrated and well-loved scientists, Science and the Akashic Field. And in this book, he defines Akasha very accurately as the radiation or brilliance considered to be the first and most fundamental element, therefore the womb of all creation. And therefore, the Akashic Chronicles are the record of everything that has happened and will be. So science is slowly embracing the idea of Akasha.
Which is, that's ironic for me because I got my Akashic Tarot deck as a gift and it sat in my home for better part of a year.
Right.
And then I just picked it up and then I started doing some readings for myself and then a couple friends and they're like, wow. Like I have not untapped the potential, but now I've been given this gift by you, which really wasn't you because as you know, or at least I believe that all the answers we have are already there. It's just me raising that antenna to that answer, correct?
Not by me, through me, if you will.
Yes, through you. Thank you. Yes, through you, I raised
the
antenna.
And many others. Through me and all the others who have inspired me. That is most important.
Which is why, and the first time I've talked about this on my podcast, but I'm creating a collective of light workers. And this podcast makes me realize that's what I'm supposed to do. Like it was a thought given to me through others. But that's that little droplet of water. I think it was Rumi that said you're not a drop of water in the ocean. You're the ocean and you're the ocean and a drop of water, right? Something. I think was it Rumi that said that, or
Rumi? Yes, I think.
Yes. And I've translated that for me for my coaching and my readings and everything that I do is that you're not a star in a unit. You're not just a star in a universe. You're the universe in a star.
Yes, it is both. You are both the center and you're at the circumference, and there is that constant
Hmm.
dynamic between the two.
Explain that further, because I've never looked at it that way. I've always looked at it as I'm this antenna, like I'm feeling myself getting a download right now, but I'm an antenna downloading information, but I'm also at the circumference. I explain the dichotomy of that.
Well,
I'd like to hear it.
um, you're the center
Hmm.
in the sense that you're at the point of the circle, but then when you explore something, you go along a certain radius until you get to the edge of your current thought exploration. And from there is a return to the center where you move again in a different direction or in a deeper way. So I'm really, what I'm getting at in a loose sense is a rebound of what we put out. There's a rebound to ourselves, and then it goes out again.
So it's a rebound.
The
I've
rebound
never
can be
thought of
from
it that
other
way, but you're
people.
right. Yeah.
It can be from other people, or it can be from ourselves when we examine what we were thinking about and say, well, that's not quite right, but what I meant to say was this, that, or the other. So that's what I mean by we start from the center and we move to the circumference. The circumference being the limit of that particular process at that time. It's just a metaphorical term, of course.
I understand that. I totally agree. Like I'm thinking about it, like it's you kind of you become the antenna and you're the center, but then you move around to see whether or not that one thought has value, and if it does,
Mm.
that changes you go back to your center, but you're now in a different spot, and then you every thought you receive, that's kind of the process. Is you go back to the center, then you kind of orbit that thought, and then you go to the next thought and you orbit, and then is that what you're kind of saying with the rebound?
Yes, I'm just saying the rebound is a reflection of one's own thought process,
Right.
in a
What
sense.
is one's own thought process? So reflection of one's own thought process. What does that mean?
Well, if you've thought of something, if you visualize something, if you composed a tune, it doesn't just go away from you. You are exploring it, you're expanding it, and then you look at it again, and then you probably make some changes. But you
Hmm.
don't ever alter the fundamental impulse behind what made you start off in the first place. So if you're composing a piece of music, you might change the key signature or the time signature, but you wouldn't change a military march into a nocturne, say.
Correct.
You're always starting off with the same impulse, but you're refining it. You're refining it.
And it's funny because
Mm.
I love the musical thing that because that makes my heart beat a little faster. Or the one where I'm of this ilk that I have guides, and I have my father's been gone for 23 years, but he's here
Mm.
literally watching this, and he's really proud of me right now. And he's gonna say, no, I wasn't, but he was playing violin when he was very, very young.
Yeah.
He's a musical, in my opinion, a musical genius.
Mm.
He was a teacher for 25 years because he raised kids and whatever, but
Mhm.
he understood what you meant by that by changing. I think I knew the key signature and I knew the time signature, but you said something else, and like I just looked over at him and he's like, "Yeah, he knew what you were talking about, so I was good. He'll explain it to me later." But that warms my heart, but that also raises that vibration and my connectedness, in my opinion, to whatever anybody wants to call God, but it raises my vibration to that center again, as you talked about. So
Mm.
I'm going to orbit a little bit for that and then come back to the next thing. And that's just a wonderful way to explain how our as you call it, a process happens. I think that's so cool. You explain things so well.
No, thank you.
You really do, sir. I'm
Well, language has,
genuinely love
thank
this.
you. One has to use allegory, analogy, and metaphor because, in a true sense, you can't explain anything. You can only walk around it. As someone put it very nicely, ever closer perambulations round the ineffable. Words are things are really ineffable. They are beyond words. But the better you explain something, the closer you can walk around what is unexplainable.
Jeez. Wow. Time is that? I keep writing down timestamps for all these gems that you have given me today. But again, I believe that I manifested this, and I believe that. But one of the other the most beautiful things that you said is I channeled that thought through you, but through all those people that you've interacted with in your life. But if you start doing some math permutations on that, that becomes so beautiful to me because, and I'll explain this very eloquently. Uh, there was this little town in Italy where this one guy had a thought. Again, he's not the only person to have this thought, but he had this thought that if he played a song from this band that I'm reaching, the Dave Grohl's in, and I can't think of the name of the band, but basically he got 1,000 musicians and singers together, and they filmed this one video of, I can't think of Dave Grohl's band right now. That's just terrible of me. But they played this one song and they rehearsed it for a year. And these are Italian, so English is not their first language, but it's a great song. They played this video, and this guy had this one thought to get 1,000 people, you know, 25 drummers, 25 bass guitarists, 25 guitarists, and a bunch of singers, however that 1,000 turned out to be, practiced for a year and then filmed a video, edited it to get that band to come to their small town to play a show for them. And it was a small town on the coast of Italy, so it wasn't like a big giant venue. But that one person had that antenna raised so high beyond the stratosphere, beyond the ozone layer, to receive that thought that this is what I want to do. I want to get this band in our little town. And they played their song to perfection. And when you said, I received that thought through you and all those people that you interacted with, I saw that whole 1,000-piece orchestra, if you will. It was a band. It wasn't an orchestra, no violins or anything, and I don't know, but it was a single thought, but it was that person taking that thought and amassing 1,000 people to do one thing for 3.5 minutes.
Yeah.
That's what made me think of that.
Excellent. So it's interesting how one sees connections in one's personal life. That's wonderful to hear, Ellie.
But it's beautiful because now as a human, now I look at people differently. I don't think it's just them that I receive thoughts through. I think of it's them and the people that they've walked through life with to help them become that person in that very moment, because every moment changes, correct? So I just think that helps me perceive humans better I'm very empathetic to begin with, but it makes me more empathetic to receiving thoughts from people, whether even they're bad thoughts.
Yeah.
I still go, okay, that's not just that person.
That's what he's transmitting through someone else.
It's kind of like one of my latest fascinations is it's a little bit of time travel, because you're kind of traveling through time through all those people that they've interacted with for you to receive that thought. And as you know, if you were to go back in time and you interact with somebody, you're changing. That's a ripple effect to what happens today. So it's kind of that ripple effect to me. And I don't know if that makes any sense to you or even my listeners.
It makes sense in this way, if I can
Please,
just
please. That's why I have you here.
analyze it. There is a wonderful saying in one of T.S. Eliot's plays, The Family Reunion, where the lord of the castle realizes my mind has been my life has been a dream dreamt through my mind by the minds of others. And
Wow.
that's when he realizes how little of his actions and behavior was really his own, and how much he was picking up from his own family.
Right.
My life has been a dream dreamt through my mind by the minds of others. And shall I just expand on that story?
I'd love
Because
to hear you
it
expand on
is,
that, please.
it is, everyone who wants to have a family should read The Family Reunion. So, very briefly, Lord Montchesey arrives home to his baronial castle, and he's talking to his Aunt Agatha about his parents and his own family background. And Aunt Agatha, and I'm cutting through a lot of stuff, Aunt Agatha says, you know, your father wanted to kill your mother, but never had the courage to do so. Then the Lord says, now I know why I pushed my wife off at sea and drowned her. My life has been a dream dreamt through my mind by the minds of others. So the
Oh,
unconscious, unwritten skeleton in the cupboard reared its ugly head, and he acted out the urges of his father, which he didn't have the courage to do. I mean, insofar as you need courage to murder someone. So, making the point that how little of our thoughts are really original. We are just picking up rubbish on the news, what Donald Trump said, sorry, what Joe Biden said, let's equalize it.
yeah, right.
Yeah, well, he said what she said, and we call them my thoughts. They're not your thoughts. You're just being a garbage man collecting it. And when the Lord realized that, then in the play, the humanoids appeared, and the humanoids are the karmic exigencies. He saw his karmic exigencies, effects before him. So the old advice, watch your thoughts. That sounds a bit schoolmasterish, but that cannot be a better piece of advice to give to anyone. Not just watch your thoughts, where are they coming from?
Right.
Ram Maharshi, the great sage in India, he didn't say stop thought. That's very dangerous. He always said trace thought to its origin. The thought producer is far more important than the thought production.
Wow. So many things. You're so wonderful.
Well, we'll talk again.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure you probably have to go here in a bit,
No,
but
no, not at all. No, I wasn't
no,
hinting.
no, I'm just
We can have another session on something more specific.
yeah, but that's I tend to don't my podcast. I had a beautiful lady on my podcast. It's my seventh episode, and I found it yesterday, and like she only gave me one line of what she was, and I can't even remember what it was. And it was I I knew her face. I've seen a couple tweets. I'm like, I want you on my podcast. She's like, sure. She got on my podcast, and she spoke. You know Eckhart Tolle. You know how Eckhart Tolle speaks. Eckhart Tolle literally
Oh, yeah,
channels
yeah, yeah.
thought,
Mhm.
and she spoke like that, where long pauses, centered
Mm.
breathing. It was, but I just let it flow and yes, I'll probably have you on again and I may want to do just a deep dive on one particular subject, but you're just so doggone charming too. And I know
Yeah,
over the pond, it's what, about 8 o'clock, quarter after 8 or quarter after
I have
7.
no idea.
I don't either, but
Yeah.
for me, yeah, because seriously, I would just do a podcast with you on time travel just to see what your thoughts were on that or anything else. But you're seriously an amazing blessing.
Thank you.
But now I look at you as the thoughts that I receive through you are through you and the thousands of people that you've interacted with in your glorious life on this planet, that's just for me, that's a beautiful thought.
Mm.
It's a beautiful thought to know that, like, later today, I'm going to a motel for a couple days because they're fixing a roof on my place,
Mhm.
and I'm going to interact with people. Yeah, I get a motel with a swimming pool in South Texas, which it's really hot. So I'm going to go hang out at the pool and reflect and reminisce about this podcast.
Mm.
And it's going to be awesome. And yeah, I do want to have you on here. And Anne is such a
Anne
sweet
is a
soul.
wonderful and very sweet soul, very, very dynamic, very helpful, and very meticulous,
Yes, she
which is
is.
a powerful combination.
It is.
Mm.
And you're my first guest that I went through a publicist for, and she made it so easy and it's fun. And
Wonderful.
can you tell me, like, I have a hard time reading like what I call self-help books, and I don't consider your book self-help, but they're
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
more science in nature. But are they like how you speak, and how long are they? Like, how
Sorry,
many
I
pages?
didn't, I
It's
don't
okay.
get your question. You said
How
self-help.
long are your books? How many pages
Oh, oh,
or
oh, right. I get you. Oh gosh, volume one. Well, I'd say in total over 1,000.
1,000 pages? Oh, that's all?
Well over 1,000.
So that's
But
probably about 300,000 words, right? Give or take.
something like that, yeah. But
Yeah.
let me emphasize that each chapter starts with a synopsis and a conclusion and a link to the next chapter. And in the overall, in the introduction in the front, I have an abstract of every chapter. I'm a great believer in showing the flow process, so people see the whole overall geography without getting trapped in a certain particular roadblock.
Right. Good. Because
Every
I
chapter
made
has a synopsis, abstract, and also side notes to help the reader.
wonderful. And yeah, I'm sure your bibliography is, thousands of pages, but uh I love this. I love your just thinking, yes, there's a lot of love. I really think you're amazing. And I tell everybody, almost everybody I know, that I love them because that's the highest form of gratitude you can. Because now that I see this and I see not only just you, but any thoughts that you receive from me or from all these people, like my father who's here, he's here
Mhm.
with me, and all of the people like that's, yeah, I could do an entire podcast just on that thought alone and how your mind, you can actually time travel without even moving one. Because most people think time travel is your body going to another point in time, but your mind can go to another point in time.
Exactly. Yeah.
And yeah, you would be the perfect person to talk about that. Perfect. I love it. Do you want to, let's, wrap this up so you can tell people how to find you? And do you want if you want them to go through your publicist, go through your publicist, that would be
Well,
wonderful. However that works.
and Kelly would provide all the details, and it's
Okay.
on the media kit.
Beautiful. Because I'm going to recommend you to
Yeah.
a bunch of my friends.
Thank you. And also on my website, uh, Kelly,
Yep.
um, that's very good. And there is a contact form on my website.
Right. And it's
I'll leave you with
by,
just one last thought, which I
please.
think, if I may, That
I love it.
there's science has explored space, outer space. They want to go to Mars. They want to go to the galaxies. Science is supreme in exploring the outer space. What science now needs to do is to explore the inner space, the mind. Because if they don't explore the inner space, they blow themselves up with all the scientific technology. So rather than building nuclear bunkers, the best bomb-proof shelter is the inner exploration, the exploration of mind, the inner space. So you've gone, Mr. Scientist, into the outer space, fine. Now go into the inner space of the mind, and there you will find everything you are looking for.
It's all there.
Yeah.
It has been throughout all time and space. So they're all there. All the answers you ever want are all there.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful conversation today. I
Thank you.
really thoroughly enjoyed this so much. You're such a gentleman and you're so kind. And
And thank you so much, Kelly. It's been a real conversation,
yeah,
a real conversation over
sometimes
coffee.
like
Yeah.
I know it's like we had a cup of tea together and as you guys call it, tea and biscuits.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted from you, especially, even with your beautiful backdrop that, I'm going to send a copy of this to your publicist so she could use it as she sees fit.
Thank you.
She'll have my own, like my little virtual NDA on that. So that's great. I really appreciate your time
Thank you, Kelly. And
and
I'm yours.
have a beautiful Monday night and keep bringing
Thank
all
you.
this positivity and thoughts to all of
And
us. We
you
really
too.
appreciate you. There's so much divine energy that loves people like you. So keep it
Thank
up.
you, Kelly. And you continue your light working, which is very sorely needed
It
these
is
days.
very short. That's
Very
why I'm
sorely
building a
needed.
collective, and trust me, I'll be telling you and Ann about it.
And it's small, great things can start from small beginnings. I'm not saying yours is a small beginning, but you don't have
It's
to start from a mega whatever.
right.
Wonderful things can start from a small seed
That's
and
right.
grow.
I have on my whiteboard, the seed is planted, just watch it grow. And that's how I
Yeah,
feel about my collective.
yeah, wonderful.
All right. It was wonderful to see you and talk to you. And I
And
can't wait
you.
till we talk again, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And all the best to you and your team and
Thank you.
everyone helping you.
Yep, I've got it. I do have a team actually. So I appreciate you so much, Eddie,
Thank
and
you.
we will talk soon.
Definitely.